the next topic. A quote from Michael Roos, who teaches at Florida State University, professor of philosophy and zoology, who writes, "Morality is not something handed down to Moses on Mount Sinai. It is something forged in the struggle for existence and reproduction, something fashioned by natural selection." So I ask our participants, what is it that we can learn from science, or maybe more particularly evolutionary biology, that we cannot learn from religion when it comes to the foundations of morality? What can we learn also then from religion that we cannot learn from science when it comes to the foundations of morality? Okay? I'll actually start, let's see, we started with Storm last time, right? So we'll start with Sean this time. We'll come over here after that.
Okay. Well, going back to this sort of, we call it the three-legged stool, this scripture, tradition, reason thing. Yeah, reason tells me if I want to learn about the natural development of human beings, then science is the best place to look to do that. And certainly, as far as my own view as a thinking person, evolutionary theory seems to be the most logical and, at this point, so fundamental to science that I'm not sure how you engage science at all without engaging in that theory. This, for me, though, is not an issue of religion. So I'll just put this out there and then let others respond. You know, there's this long-standing sort of nature-nurture kind of a debate. And so I guess my one caveat here would be that I definitely see natural selection interacting with environment and with human sociality. So I certainly would not want to take this in a way that was what I would sort of call a biological reductionism. But as long as we think about this in conversation with a complex view of society and social relations, yeah, I think it's heading in a good direction. Makes sense to me.
No flaws. So, I'm an evolutionary biologist. I obviously think that evolution has something to offer, but I'm also a skeptic. My reaction to many big claims, religious or scientific, is maybe. And there's a lot here that I say maybe to. Do I think that humans have been shaped by natural selection? Absolutely. Do I think that this relates to morality? Absolutely. If we're thinking about our ability to reason about moral questions, that cognitive ability is clearly part of the product of natural selection. Even when we get to more particularly, when we think about what compels us to act, a combination of feelings, desires, as well as reasoning, those ability to feel, to empathize, again, I think there's evidence to suggest that that has been shaped by natural selection. I won't say proof. I think there's some evidence towards that. When we ask, though, morality itself, is that something shaped by natural selection? Well, that's too simple. As both Sean and Storm have said, it is very clear that we as humans are the products of our genes and our environment, and that any purely genetic view is too simple. If we are thinking about morality, you look at human populations. Genetically, we're very, very similar to each other. Our behaviors are quite different. To pick a sort of extreme case, the estimate of the sociopaths in populations runs, around 10% or so? It's a high number. If we've all been selected for morality, that 10% shouldn't be there. Not if it's a strictly genetic thing. So I argue that the evidence is very clear that a simple evolutionary genetic model of morality is not sufficient. So where does that leave us? Well, I think that science is able to contribute some things that religion can't. If we're going to ask, what's the timeline in development of morality, then looking at humans and looking at our mammalian relatives and asking, what might morality look like in these other species? And there's a lot of evidence that there are aspects of empathy, in other species, aspects of what might be called fairness in other species, which suggests that we aren't alone in having moral sentiments, and that we can understand ourselves and how we became what we are through evolution. And in part, there may be particular aspects of our morality, perhaps some of the most problematic ones, that might also be explained by evolution. There's some evidence suggesting that these same forces that allow groups to work well together may predispose people to mistrust outsiders. That may be part of our evolutionary legacy. I don't think that's a positive one. And I tend to follow with many philosophers in saying it's very dangerous to try to derive an ought from an is, where we can state what the world is like, we can state our genetic legacy. That doesn't mean that's how the world should be. It doesn't mean that because we might have a tendency towards paranoia, suspicion, that that's how we should live. And so I think that there are other aspects, whether religious or other aspects of our culture, that are necessary parts of morality and that complement the science. If we want to understand how we got here, science has a lot to offer. If we want to understand how to treat our colleagues, our students, those we love, the science may not have as much to offer as other aspects of our culture.
That applause was for her. It may interest some of you to know that Michael Ruse advanced that claim about 15 years ago on this campus, actually, over in Boulder's Hollow Science. I see a few teasers in here that you're one of them. I agreed with him then, I agree with him now. Let me just go to a quote from Theodosius Dobzhansky, who's a famous biologist who said around 40 years ago, "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." Now, that was a good insight. And I think we can apply that insight narrowly to our own species and say that nothing in human experience or behavior makes sense apart from evolution. And I include in that our religious behavior and our moral behavior. Nothing in human experience or behavior makes any sense apart from the paradigm of evolution. I guess I'm pretty dogmatic about that, but I think I've got a lot of support here. Okay, what's the question? The question is concerning morality. What can science teach us that we can't learn from religion, and what can religion teach us that we can't learn from science? What can science teach us that we can't learn from religion? Almost everything. What can religion teach us that science can't? The most important thing. Science can tell us what life is, how it works, what human life is, how humans work, and it can tell us what's required to go on living sustainably. These are all things that we get from science. So science can tell us a lot about the business, the mechanics of life. What science can't tell us is whether life is a good thing. Science just doesn't weigh in on that. A lot of scientists believe it is a good thing. A lot of scientists say all biotic creatures are geared up to act as if it's a good thing, but it is a value statement that cannot be demonstrated by any kind of inquiry. That's a faith statement, okay? That's my faith. I believe that life is a good thing. I can't demonstrate that it is. I can put forward some arguments that are speculative and philosophical. And if you're interested in that, perhaps some other time. But science can't tell us if it's a good thing. That's a faith statement. But once we accept that faith statement that life is a good thing, then we turn to inquiry to help us make the really difficult decision, right? Because there's a lot of life out there, a lot of different life forms, a lot of individuals within each life form, and of course life is always against life, and that means conflict among good things, and that's ethics, okay? And that's dirty business, but it's absolutely a necessary business. Now, having said that, let me just object a little bit to the way in which the question seems to drive religion and science into different quarters, because I'm a little uncomfortable with that. For my own religious perspective, and I'm vaguely religious, like Eric is vaguely religious, and I'm reluctantly religious and resentfully religious. So, in a way, I'm sort of unavoidably religious. I can't help it. Doesn't it sound that way? In my own religious perspective, science plays a huge, huge role. And here comes the controversy. I think science plays a huge, huge role in everybody's religious perspective. The difference between Michael Bruce and Pat Robertson is not that Michael Bruce accepts science and Pat Robertson rejects science. The difference between Michael Bruce and Pat Robertson is that Michael Bruce accepts 21st century science and Pat Robertson accepts first century science. That's true. And so, bear this in mind. When you get out there in the world, you'll hear a lot of people talk about the conflict between science and religion. There isn't much conflict between science and religion. There's a lot of conflict between old science and new science, okay? So there's a lot of conflict between those people who reject evolution and those people who accept evolution. That's not a conflict between religion and science. That's a conflict between science and old science, right? So don't blame religion. Religion tells us what is good. And so my religious faith tells me that life is a good thing. Now, I've got just about an hour and a half more on that. But I'll let you go.